I think, the Sinatra connection was always very important. The thing, if Sinatra was at your restaurant, and Frank Sinatra came to Eli's many, many times when my father was alive. Actually, the watch I wear, the Cartier watch, was a gift from Frank and Barbara Sinatra, engraved to my dad. It came in 1987, and actually when Frank Sinatra died, the media came and took pictures of the watch and interviewed Hal Roach and talked about what we did. Taste of Chicago, actually saw in the news yesterday, Don Roth, the family announcing they're closing after 90 years. Don Ross. And that photo, actually, think of Rich Melman and his amazing career. Arnie on one side, Don Roth, Rich Melman, and my dad. I think we had those waiter coats for a while. Certainly you could see this is Jane Burns era, the late 70s, 1980, the first Taste of Chicago. Actually, this year, next year's a big year. It's 30 years since the first Taste of Chicago. 30 years. History of Eli's Cheesecake since we debuted at the first Taste. And actually, my dad was born in 1910, so it's 100 years since he was born. So a lot of longevity, and I think, in the introduction, this idea of family business, the real story, the real things that it started a long time ago, but things continue. And I think that's really the exciting part, that you could continue to build upon what you do, that it's real, you tell your story, and I have a great job. If you can talk about your parents and the wonderful people you work with and the people who've committed their careers to you, you're doing pretty well. And I think that's a lot of the fun we have. We like to do big cakes. This is Taste of Chicago at 25 years, getting the big cake ready. One of the signatures of what we do. Here's the first big cake. Actually, I found this in sort of getting ready for tonight, looking at the archives. The Stanley Cusper, Cook County clerk after Eddie Barrett. This is the day, same day that Lady Di and Prince Charles got married, because the hook to the news was that who was going to be the first couple married in Chicago, and this was a gasoline station attendant in uniform, and that was the first big cake. And actually it was Carol Marine was starting her career, and so she actually followed them back to the gas station after the wedding. So I think that's how, that just shows you, sort of the years of the cakes. And the cakes certainly get more elaborate, more magical. It's actually a pretty interesting time for big cakes. A lot of people, I certainly see my daughters watching a lot of the Food Network, if it's Cake Boss, if it's the other shows. And so we have this great heritage of big cakes here. Alderman Terrace, Mickey Mouse and Cinderella for the Magnificent Mile Lights Festival, celebrating, I think, the 25th of Disney World that year. A lot of special visitors. This is before we moved to our current facility. This was in 1996, early in the year, when Jay Leno, this was the only time that Jay Leno took his show to Chicago. It was at Rosemont, and we did a great skit. Bob and I were just with many of our associates who were in the background, myself with Mike Newhouse, and really, I think the thing was, when he comes, I said, well, what do I do? And he says, well, this person's playing you, because the job was to stick his head in the cake, and he took it very well. Big cakes and going to Washington. I think we are a case of saying how education pays, a commitment to education. We started to work with Wright College in 1988 for educational initiatives, started doing things for our people, and so in 1992, when Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were campaigning in Chicago. They came to Eli's to see our educational program. They invited us to Washington, and Aretha Franklin came to the mall to cut this giant 2,000-pound cheesecake with all of our associates from the educational program. And you're actually going to see Ron Gidwitz, good former gubernatorial candidate and head of the city colleges, Edwin Eisendrath, over on the other side. So it was quite the episode, and they actually made a lot of the videos, and Bill Clinton's visit was on the cover of the New York Times and the Washington Post. And really that relationship was really good. This was Hillary's 50th in Chicago with the mayor and Mrs. Daley, and the fact that we were invited to participate with our daughters, you know, two of whom who live now in Washington, and for my wife and I. And that cake was served, and was really an honor to be able to do that. So, you know, how big cakes, public policy, and, you know, nice people come together. Wheel of Fortune we've done twice. Actually, this was the first time. They were here last year, and really wonderful to do that. Again, our youngest daughter, Lana's a lot older. What not to wear. And actually, when they were going to do that, actually, Stacy, graduate of Vassar, where our youngest daughter goes to college, and in that case, this is with their producers. My wife and daughter had met them in a vintage store, and the idea was what type of, they were looking for to do a show about the workplace, and the question would be, would we do an ambush on someone we work with who's a bad dresser? And I said, I don't think that's really good to say to somebody, we don't think you dress well, plus we don't want to go to New York. So they said, look, we're going to do a show on teachers. So we said, we'll do the golden ticket, sort of like Willy Wonka, and we'll have this audience of our associates and make, you know, have a presentation, say, let's go look at the cake, and then they pick the people for that evening. And actually there was one person who actually, you know, there's always the behind the scenes, she got into a fight with her family because she thought, you know, she was insulted that they told her she was fat. So a lot of things that you don't want to necessarily get into. Opening a Looking Glass, David Schwimmer, you know, really beautiful design when they opened in the water tower, so you could sort of see the elements of that. I think this might have been the most exciting thing we've ever done. I mean, Chicago and World Championships. Now, when the Bears went to the Super Bowl in 1985, I think it was the first time we got a lot of national attention. It was Harold Washington saying, I have ribs, pizza, and Eli's Cheesecake. But when the White Sox won the World Series, one day they had the huge ticker tape parade down LaSalle Street. And then the next day they're going to be honored by the city council, and we said, you know, can we do a cake? They said, okay. And then they said, well, there's not a lot of room. They said, could I introduce the mayor, Ozzie Guillen, and Jerry Reinsdorf? So that's like, I mean, again, the World Championships do not come very often. And, you know, as we say in 2006, you know, with New Orleans, actually, I think today New Orleans is doing a heck of a lot better than the Bears. But if it's Bulls, Bears, Cubs, Sox, we're there. You know, Eli and Bozo at the Taste, the early years. This is 1987. This is actually the year we did the big cake. And actually, one of the great stories of that is Mayor Harold Washington was going to come and read a proclamation, but it looked like it was going to rain, and then my wife arranged for Bozo to read it. So we were very happy he was there. You know, our celebrations, this is us at Taste in 2007 with Kenny Rogers,